Alright, triangle area differs from squares and rectangles. Okay, the formulas we're going to use are right up here, and they're both the same thing. This one is divide by 2 at the end of it. This one is times by a half. If you divide by 2 or you times by a half, they're the same thing. These things are the same, so whichever one you like to do best is fine. Now let's break this down a little bit here. Area of a triangle has base times height, whichever way you do it. If you think about a square or a rectangle, that was basically the same thing. Our equation for finding the area of this was length times width is basically the same thing as base times height. Okay, we just called it length times width for a rectangle. The reason we divide by 2 on a triangle is because if you think about it, if I take this rectangle and I cut it in half, I get 2 triangles. So we need to divide by 2 or times by a half because we only want the result of one of these triangles. If we were to just do base times height for these, we would actually get a full rectangle. So we need to do the divide by 2 or the times by a half, so we only end up with half of the shape. Okay. This is pretty easy because you just need to follow the formula, but the toughest part is figuring out what's the base and what's the height. Some triangles will have more than one thing you can use for a base and a height, but there's one thing that you need to understand about the base and the height. They must be perpendicular. They must be perpendicular, meaning that if this is your base, your height's got to make a right angle. No matter where you draw it at, your base and your height have to come together to form a right angle. And there's a lot of ways we can do this. Okay, I'm going to take this one for instance right here. Okay, we've got a classic scalene triangle. All the sides are different. Okay, so on this one, our base would be right down here. Our height would be this, because that forms our right angle. It forms our perpendicular. So let's say that that height was 2. Okay, our formula is base times height, base times height. So 10 times 2 would be 20. But that would be if it was a full rectangle, and it's not. So now we have to do one of these last things here. Okay, 20 divided by 2 is 10. So our answer to this would be 10 square units. We could fit 10 square units into this. Okay, if you wanted to do it the other way, we could. We take our base times our height, which is still 20, and if we want to times that by a half, we can do that. I just have to make this 20 over 1 because we're dealing with fractions. 20 times 1 is 20. 1 times 2 is 2, so we got 20 halves. 20 halves is the same thing as 10. Okay? And remember, anytime we get an area, that indicates that we can fit this many squares inside of this that are that on each side. So if we're doing units, if I change this to inches, that means we could fit 10 square inches inside of that. Okay? So there's the first one. Now this one's going to be pretty easy to find the height too. I could turn it in a lot of different directions. You know, I'm not going to get my perpendicular line if I turn it anyway. That way we might be able to, and I'll show you that in a second here. Okay, actually I'm going to show you that one with this up here. Multiple ways. Because there's going to be some triangles that have more than one base and height. And the key to that is they'll all come out to the same thing or about the same thing. But let's focus on this one. If we call our base this, our height's going to have to be this. Now we have our right angle. Okay, it's perpendicular, so we can make this the base and this the height. Let's say this is 6. Okay, base times height, 6 times 3 is going to be 18. That 18 would be if it was a rectangle or a square, but it's not, it's a triangle. So we have to cut it in half or times by a half. I'll just do the divide by 2's because I think it's easier to do. Divide by 2 is going to equal 9. So our answer is going to be 9 square, let's say this was meters. 9 square meters. We can fit 9 square meters into this. And of course, this is not drawn to scale because that's not anywhere close to a meter. But if it was, we could fit 9 square meters into this. Okay. Now we'll go up to our, that was isosceles triangle, by the way. I mean, just reminders. Equilateral triangle. That means that they're all fours. Okay. You could do this a ton of different ways. If I called this the base, this could be your height. That forms a right angle. Okay. I could do it a little differently. I could call this my base and that my height. That forms a right angle. And if I need to turn it like that for you to see, that definitely makes a right angle. We could also do it with the other one. Draw it straight across there. It makes my little T right there. I've got a right angle. Okay. Any way is going to be fine as long as it makes a right angle, as long as the base and the height are perpendicular. Okay. So now we just need to do base times height. Let's do this one. Let's say our height is 3. 4 times 3 is going to be 12. 12, that's would be a rectangle or a square. We got to cut it in half. 12 divided by 2 is going to be 6 square, we'll call it feet. 6 square feet. Okay. Last one, we have a right triangle already. So this is interesting. We can do, this is the base, and this is the height because they make a right, we already have a pre-done right angle. Okay, if that's the case, 6 times 4, 24. 24 divided by 2 is 12. Okay, now let's say I flip it like this. Still, maybe this time we call this our base and this our height. Still makes a right angle. Okay, so that would be still 6 times 4 is 24, divided by 2 is 12. Now, other way we could look at this. I could turn this like this. Okay? I could make that my height. Okay, that definitely makes a right angle. Let's say that's 3. Okay? So same deal. 8 times 3 is still 24. 24 divided by 2 is still 12. Okay, so the main point to take out of this, the formula is easy. Base times height divided by 2, not a problem. The toughest part is going to be figuring out what's the base and what's the height. Make sure that you are flexible with this. Okay, some of these have more than one base and more than one height. They'll all work. You just have to make sure they form a perpendicular. And last thing I'll show you is, I guess I should have showed you this with the other one, but I'm looking at this one right here. Okay, I could probably draw a line right here for the height, make a right angle, and call that my base. Just be flexible while you're doing these problems. But the formulas are base times height, and then either divide by 2 or times by a half. That'll get you the same thing.